What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Fitness for Life podcast. I'm your host, Jackson Lohr, and today I have with me Adam Richmond out of Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Adam is kind of a colleague of mine. We've both had a foot in both the athletic training world and the fitness world, the online coaching space. And Adam, he's been coaching about the same, number of years as I have, but with a wealth of medical experience behind him as well, and a lot more experience as a dad. So Adam, thank you for coming on today. Excited for our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Jackson, I appreciate you inviting me to come on to the podcast and talk about, I think we're going to talk about some protein. So pretty excited about that topic. That's definitely in my wheelhouse.
Yeah. And it's something I think, it's one of those things. I forget who I was listening to say it, but it might have been Luca Hosovar, his podcast, where he was breaking it down of like, if you don't say, if people hear something up to 8 times and still might not, implement it or
Yep.
drive that home. And so it's, we're constantly driving things like this home. And so really, always glad to talk about protein and how important it is, not only for weight loss, but building muscle, longevity, your overall health. So we'll get into that here in a second. But I want to start. This is something I always do at the very beginning of my podcasts is, hey, how did you get to where you are? Because I think your story is pretty unique. We share elements of it, but, I made my transition a little, earlier, significantly earlier than you did. But yeah, talk to me about, how you got into what you're doing now and what that looked like for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll just say that maybe you're a little bit smarter than me for getting out and making the transition a little earlier. But yeah, no, I don't want to call myself old because I don't feel old, but I'm turning 40 this year, so I'm getting there. But yeah, I've been in this world for a long time. I graduated from Lockhaven University with a bachelor's of science in health science with a concentration on athletic training back in 2007, which seems like forever ago. But then I went on from there, earned my master's degree before going on to practice as an athletic trainer full time. After grad school, went to Dickinson College. So it's a small D3 liberal arts school in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, which is where I still reside now today. But I worked there for 14 years, worked as an athletic trainer, worked with all the sports. I mean, we had 24 varsity sports while I was there. So,
yeah.
Everything you could think of, football, lacrosse, soccer, baseballs, any sport you could think of. I've had experience dabbling in it. So my experience from that was being a D3 athletic trainer with very limited resources, right? So I came into the show, I knew what I knew as an athletic trainer in the rehab world, and I felt really confident around my ability to take an injured athlete and get them back on the field. But then I realized that I had to do a little bit more than that because of the limited resources, right? Like I didn't have a strength conditioning coach that I could say, hey, this athlete is now done with their rehab, but they're not ready to get on the field yet. Go take them, right? I didn't have that. So I had to figure it out. And so very early on was like, oh, I'm missing this gap between the end of rehab and the beginning of sports performance. And so that's whenever I really dialed in and it was like, all right, well, I got to figure this out. And then, so that I started going down the rabbit hole to strength conditioning. And then you realize, hey, to really truly get results, you need to have the nutrition piece dialed in, right? You can't just lift weights. Yeah, sure, you'll get good results. You can get fit from lifting weights, but to truly change your body comp, build muscle, all the things that we're trying to do when we go to the gym, you need to have the nutrition piece dialed in as well. So that was the next step, right? Okay, now I know strength conditioning, I know rehab, I don't know nutrition. So dove into that, got a bunch of certifications, had my PN, did all that kind of stuff. And so I started to put this model together, right? So early on, I was a very big biomechanics nerd, love biomechanics, human movement, respiration, mobility.
Yeah.
Added the strength conditioning piece, got all that under my belt and really felt comfortable dialing that in, added the nutrition piece. So again, I'm just starting to build out this model and really enjoyed my time at Dickinson College working with those athletes because that's where I got all my experience from, right? I was able to kind of basically use them as a mini experiment to test out my theories, test out my model. And over 14 years while I was there, that's what I did. I dialed in my model and I figured things out. Right. And I was a huge nerd. I still am a huge nerd. and just dial and just like I go out and I just absorb things. Like if I run into a problem, right, I want to solve it. So I go, I find resources, I take courses, I read books, I read research, and I solve the problem. And that's what I've done over the years. And like you were mentioning off air, we were talking a little bit, right? So then during COVID, it was honestly, Jackson, it was kind of ironic. Right before COVID even started, I had always wanted to have my own business, right? I just never could figure out how to make it work, right? Like the brick and mortar seemed like a really big commitment to financial, like there's overhead. So it just scared me. So I was always dragging my feet, and realized that I could sell programs online, right? Like I could have a side hustle while I was still working as an athletic trainer to at least, I had all these skills, and I felt like I wasn't able to help as many people as I thought I could, being locked into the college. So I started selling things online, got a small roster of clients. And so I was doing both, right? I was doing the athletic training thing full time. And then I had my side hustle, of the online trainer, programming, or the online programming. So from there, COVID hit, and I had already started this online training model, and obviously everybody had to go online, and I felt like I was a step ahead. So I was like, well, I may as well just go all in on this. I had the time. This is what everybody's doing. So I really spent the time during COVID developing my online model, and then stayed at Dickinson for a year, probably after COVID. And then there was just like a last straw where I was like, you know what, like this just isn't who I am or what I want to do anymore. And so I decided it was time to step away from Dickinson, and go all in on Richmond Training Systems, which is the name of my company. And so, back about 2 years ago now, I went all in on Richmond Training Systems. And from there on out, I now currently help, I focus on helping parents lose up to 20 pounds in 12 weeks without endless cardio or crazy workouts or giving up your favorite foods. So that's kind of my story. I think hopefully I didn't take too much of a detour there. Hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, and definitely, you talk about, you and your friends, really deep diving some of the biomechanics and that stuff. And I was a recipient of a lot of that trickle down because, you and Nate Nestor, our mutual friend, he would always share that with his students, and of which I was one. And so, I was a beneficiary of a lot of the stuff you guys were looking into, the different Pat Davidson stuff and the Zach Couples stuff, and just all that stuff that you guys were. And I think Joel Jameson was a big inspiration
for development. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so, I was learning that stuff as an athletic training student, which was really a big primer for, the direction I've taken in my own training business. So thank you for that on the
you are
back end.
You're welcome. That honestly, I mean, that's I don't want to. I think athletic training is a great profession, and
absolutely.
I truly believe it's one of the best foundational professions to prepare you for other things, right?
Yeah.
Like for us, for example, like that experience you get hands-on, the education that you have to go through, it prepares you for anything in the health fitness realm. So I don't want to, deter people from the profession, but there are some other really cool things you can do after you have that knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. Echo everything you just said. That's 100% correct. But yeah, so let's, I appreciate you giving that background. Let's dive into our topic here, right? Let's talk a little bit about protein. I think the best way to go about this, let's just talk through if I'm a new client, and we're talking to our audience here. If I'm a new client and I know zero things about protein, if you're walking somebody through that, what does your model look like? You're like, hey, in terms of our nutrition, when we're really focusing on protein, here's why. Talk me through that.
Yeah. You sure you only got 20 minutes? How long you only got? No, just teasing.
We'll go as long as we need to. Let's do it.
Yeah. So protein. So when we talk about nutrition, let's take the 10,000 foot view, and let's talk about macronutrients, right? So macro, big ticket items. So we have fat, we have carbs, we have protein, right? So when we look at macros, well, what do each one of those do, right? So protein is what is the building block of pretty much everything in your body, right? Like if you have to if you have to have structure, you have to have protein, right?
Yeah.
And specifically, it's most important for my clients because we're talking about body composition. And if you talk about body composition, What is your body made of? Well, it's either made up of fat or it's made up of muscle, was really what we're talking about, right?
Right.
And if we want to change that composition, we want to have more muscle and less fat. And so therefore, if we want to have more muscle, and we need to have more protein, right? So protein is the building block of muscle, so we need to have more protein. So that's what protein does. So back to the macro. So that's protein. That's going to build your muscle. It's going to build all of your structural materials in your body.
Yep.
And then you have your fat. Fat is another essential. So when we talk about the macronutrients, fat and protein are both essential, meaning you have to eat those, maybe not necessarily every day, but you need to eat those in your diet or bad things are going to happen, right? So fat is really important for, like nerve health and hormones and making other things in the body. So it's essential. You have to have it. So we have to have some level of fat in our diet. Carbohydrates then are the last macro, and they're the only one that is not essential, right? We can live and never eat carbs. Now, I don't love that model. That's not how I coach my clients. I think carbs are important because I also, Jackson, think of all of my clients as athletes, right?
Right.
Obviously, we've been in the athletic training world, meaning that we've primarily dealt with athletes. So my mindset, my model is always around everybody's an athlete. Even if you don't feel like an athlete, you don't want to be an athlete. If you're training and you're exercising and you're working out, you're an athlete.
Right.
So carbs are important for that. So carbs in the macros that we're talking about. So protein, building block of muscle, structure, fat, nerve health, hormones, lots of things that we need to use to make those. And then we have our carbohydrates, which are really going to be your fast energy, right? So if you're working out, if we're exercising, if you need quick energy, carbohydrates are what's going to store that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or what's going to supply that. So those are kind of your big macros, right? Then we have micronutrients, minerals, vitamins, all that kind of stuff. We're not going to get into that today because we're talking about protein.
Yeah.
But so we have fat, we have carbs, we have protein. Protein, back to the protein because that's what we're talking about. First thing, I want my athletes, I want my clients to have more muscle. If I want them to build more muscle, they have to have more protein. So that's number one, why I love protein.
Yeah.
Number two is it has a high thermic effect, right? So it's not, so whenever somebody says, hey, a calorie is not a calorie, this is what they're talking about, right? So like people get all confused. It's like, oh, energy in, energy balance, calories in, calories out. Oh, it doesn't work, right? Well, it does work. Energy balance absolutely works. There's just some nuance and some caveats that if you're not understanding the model, this is what they're talking about, right? So thermic effect of food, it costs you energy, it costs you calories to break down protein, right? So if, let's say, for example, I'm just going to make these numbers up. These aren't like exact scientific numbers, but so for every gram of protein, we get 4 calories, right? Same thing with carbs. We get 4 calories per gram. For fat, we get 9 calories per gram.
And that's calories in, folks who are listening.
Yep. Calories in, not calories out. Right. Exactly. So whenever I eat that 1 gram of protein, I'm actually going to use 1 or 2 calories to break that down. So now I'm only netting maybe 2, maybe 3. Again, I'm just making numbers up. So we're not actually netting all 4 of those calories. So if I eat a gram of protein versus a gram of carbs, where the carbs don't have that same thermic effect, they don't have the same cost, I'm actually going to net all 4 calories from the carbs. Now, is it exactly all 4? Probably not, right? There's probably a little bit of cost, but it's not as great of a cost as protein. So kind of to give you a big picture, right? So like if I'm eating, let's again, just making up numbers, if I'm eating 1,000 calories a day, but I'm eating 100 grams of protein and the other person's only eating 50 grams of protein, I'm actually going to net less calories per day because I ate 100 grams of protein rather than 50 grams of protein.
Yeah.
So that's a huge deal, right? Just being able to eat basically free calories, right? Free food. In my model, I love food volume, right? Like I want you to be able to eat as much food as possible so that you don't feel hungry. So to be able to do that, we prioritize protein because there's a high thermic effect. Plus, protein also keeps you feeling satiated, right? Yeah. As you are breaking down that protein, like I said, it has a high thermic effect. That thermic effect is because it costs you energy to break it down and digest it. That digestion it's a process, right? So as you eat protein, it goes into your stomach and you don't just immediately, it's not just digested and gone, right? It has to sit in your stomach. It has to actually be broken down into its smaller components and then absorbed into the bloodstream and then utilized, right? Yeah. That process keeps you feeling satiated, right? You have this food in your stomach, you're not hungry. Compare that to like Kool-Aid or even, some type of junk food that just has a ton of calories, no protein, it's all carbs. It's broken down immediately.
Yeah.
It's in your bloodstream, and now you're either storing it or using it, but it's gone very quickly and you're hungry again.
Yeah.
Right. And hunger drives bad decisions, right? Whenever you're on a diet and you're trying to restrict, right, you have to have some type of mindset around restriction. If you want to lose weight, you have to eat less calories. So you have to restrict something. What that is up to you. But being hungry makes it really hard to restrict things, right?
Yeah.
So controlling hunger and appetite via eating more protein is going to allow you to control that, which then allows you to make better decisions throughout the day. So thermic effect, right? It costs us less energy, or it costs us more energy to break it down. That cost also makes it sit in our stomach longer. So now we feel satiated and we're not hungry. If we're not hungry, we're not going to eat junk food. And then the last big piece of the puzzle, we talked about thermic effect, satiety, protein for muscle. I feel like I'm forgetting something here, but I'm gonna pause there. But that's pretty much the big rocks of why I like protein.
Yeah. Well, I think, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but as someone is losing weight, and most people come to you and I for some degree of weight loss, right?
Yep.
As somebody is losing weight, I think maintenance, so muscle maintenance is kind of something, when we increase our protein intake throughout a weight loss period, right? You might still lose a little bit of muscle when you're losing weight. That's normal, expected, right? But we want them to maintain as much as possible, and that's why we increase our protein intake during those times, so that as we're lifting weights, right, we have to have some sort of resistance training to get that effect. As we're lifting weights, we're able to maintain that muscle, which once we have lost the fat, right, once we've lost that weight, then now we can maintain it, right? We're able to maintain it better because, our body composition has changed.
Yeah, no, dude, you nailed that. That is a big piece of that. I knew I was forgetting something. That's a good topic to bring up. I'm glad that you said that. Absolutely. So what you said, you nailed it. I think there's a little bit even more to that I think people should understand.
Yeah.
There's a huge difference between weight loss and fat loss, right? This is what we're talking about. If you go into a calorie deficit and you do not prioritize protein, and you do not create the stimulus for maintaining that muscle, like you were just saying, the resistance training.
Yeah.
So if you don't have protein and you don't resistance train, and you go into a calorie deficit, especially if it's an aggressive calorie deficit, you are much more likely to give up muscle than fat. So yes, if you do that aggressively and you don't prioritize protein, you're going to see the scale go down, and you feel amazing. But like we were just talking about there, and the point that Jackson just made was that you're going to lose the muscle. And here's the bad thing about that. Two bad things, right? One, if you lose the muscle, now I'm not fat shaming anybody or trying to make anybody feel bad, but that's what I would call skinny fat, right? So now you've leaned out, and it's probably a good thing that you've lost some fat, but you've also lost a lot of muscle with it. And that is not good for metabolism, right? If we want to talk about metabolic flexibility and our ability to handle glucose, sugar, we need that muscle. Muscle is so vital to disposing of sugar and glucose and carbs, right?
Yeah.
So really important. So now if you're skinny fat, right, we lost a bunch of weight, but it wasn't all fat and some of it was muscle, it's going to be a lot harder for you to maintain that lower weight because now you've actually dropped your metabolism, right? If you don't have muscle, your metabolism isn't as high. It costs you energy to have muscle, right? So now your maintenance, right? You've done all this work, you got your weight down, but now it's really hard to maintain it because you have no muscle mass, your metabolism's crashed, right?
Yeah.
So there's that piece. Plus, you don't have the look that you're going for, right? Like most people want to do this because they want to look fit and lean, right? Or they want to. I love the word tone, right? Like everybody, get on a call, everybody like, what are your goals? Oh, I want to tone up. What does that mean? Like that's not a real word, right? Like you and I know that. You can't tone a muscle, right? You can either build a muscle or you can lose fat. And most people, when they say they want to tone up, what they really mean is the combination of the two. They want to build the muscle and then they want to lose some fat and expose the muscle that they built.
Exactly. Yeah.
And if you don't prioritize protein and resistance training while you're on that cut, you're not going to expose any muscle because it's not going to be there.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I was just talking with a client this morning about, hey, how do you feel your progress is going? What's, how are you feeling in your clothes? All that sort of stuff. And this particular client is pretty focused on the number on the scale, and I'm trying to like reframe that a little bit, right? We want weight loss, and he's getting it, but he's getting it at a slower rate than he would like. But then the other thing is like, now there's compliments coming from other people. He's feeling good in his clothes, and it's like, all right. So this is, when you talk about wanting to look toned, wanting to feel good, these are the things that we want to point out is like, the process is working. You're revealing muscle that has been there, but now because you're maintaining that muscle throughout your fat loss, maybe we're losing it at a rate that you don't necessarily, you would like it to go faster, but because it's going at a slower rate, now you're able to maintain that muscle, feel really good about how you look. Yeah. And that's
maybe they even build some muscle, right?
Right, exactly.
Maybe they're recomping and it's just equal rates.
Yeah, and that's
all the time.
Yeah, and that's something I tell a lot of my clients is like, hey, in the first 6 weeks, if you're really hitting your protein, if you haven't been lifting weights for a while, and now we jump into it, if you're really hitting your protein numbers really well, and we're going at maybe a slower rate of fat loss than, maybe we're not going for that like 2 pounds a week. Maybe we're going for like a half pound to a pound. That scale might actually go up a little bit. Yeah. And that's okay. Muscle, what we know is muscle is more dense than fat, which means we can get smaller and heavier at the same time. And that's something that I think is really valuable for people to hear, especially up front, to establish some of that buy-in. It's like, hey, I'm on the same team as you, but I want you to understand that this process is not cut and dry from the very beginning. So understanding the nuances like that of the different pieces of body composition that are happening. Hey, it might go slower than you think, but these are the other things to look out for.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially like you said, I think you nailed it with the clients that haven't been resistance training very much, right? Yeah. Like if you haven't been in the gym for a really long time or ever, and you've never prioritized protein to the extent that you and I probably want them to,
sure,
absolutely. Like that first 6 weeks, you're going to recomp.
Yeah.
Especially like you said, if you're not in a super aggressive deficit, absolutely. I think that's like it's frustrating for females because a lot of dudes, right, can drop a ton of weight.
Yeah.
And build a lot of muscle really easily early on. But it's just because they're already so big, right? Like they have all this extra weight on board.
Yeah.
So somebody like that can build muscle and be in a pretty aggressive deficit at the same time, right? Now, a smaller female who doesn't have as much room to work with is going to really struggle to try to do both at the same time, right? They're better off trying to focus on building muscle or focusing on losing weight.
Yeah.
Not trying to do the same both at the same time. But that, dude that's 40 pounds overweight and hasn't ever resistance trained before, he can absolutely do it all at the same time and just completely crush it. Like you said, for that first like 6 to 12 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a good point you make about, especially women who are maybe don't need to lose that much weight. Like maybe they need 5 to 10 pounds for what would be considered like an ideal or really healthy weight for them. Yep. I see a lot of people in the like 150 to 180 or 190 range. And it's like, depending on height,
sure,
what have you. But in that range, I feel like that's the hardest, mentally, I feel like that's the hardest group when it comes to, losing weight and working on body recomposition in a healthy manner, right? They tend to have more immediate success with like, these short-term like crash diets. And then it's like, all right, picking up the pieces after that and trying to maintain.
A lot of those are, and like you said, they'll see the result that they're looking for, which is the scale result.
Right.
but it's literally those crash diets over the last, I mean, I deal with a lot of people my age, right? Like 30s, 40s that lived through like 80s and 90s dieting where it was all about being smaller, not eating food, like, right? Like go for runs, don't eat and be small, right? And that completely trashed these women's metabolism.
Right.
They have no muscle, right? Because they've never resistance trained. But like, yeah, maybe you do some aerobics or some take classes. And yeah, I'm not saying you don't have any muscle, right? But if you never really
very little
train, you're not going to have as much as you could. And so now your metabolism's lower because of that. Plus, you crash dieted. Whenever you don't give your body calories, it adjusts. Metabolic flexibility, or sorry, metabolic adaptation, right? Like if you don't give it, if you give yourself 1,000 calories, your body's going to figure out a way to live on 1,000 calories.
Right.
And then you're like, oh, why am I not losing weight on 1,000 calories? Because that's all your body knows how to use, right? So yeah, that I 100% agree. That is a really hard group of people. And I think they're better off prioritizing protein and resistance training. And actually building that muscle and building the engine before they try to lean out. Yeah. It's hard to convince them to do that, but the clients that do get the best result.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where, you know, I have this conversation with a lot of my clients because most of my clients are women in their 50s and up. And, you know,
really hard.
They're, you know, so they're going through menopause and they've, or most of them, I will say, and, you know, have other confounding issues with metabolism. So, yeah, oftentimes having that conversation, just being like, hey, like sometimes maintenance is what we want to go for because, you know, we need to recomposition the body. We need to build muscle. Maybe we want to put on 5 or 10 pounds first so that we can do things in a healthy way, because otherwise your body, the stress of it on your body is not going to be, you know, what we want. Or we do something like, and I think you were briefly getting to it, something like a reverse diet, right? Yeah. Can we get you up to an amount of calories? You know, if your body is used to operating on 1,000 calories, all right, can we slowly, and I think slowly is the key, get you up to a healthy way of eating, maybe 1,500, maybe 1,600, or even more calories that, you know, we're prioritizing protein. I think something, you know, we won't go deep into it right now, but fiber, right? Prioritizing fiber, making sure our gut is healthy, that sort of thing. Veggies and fruits, you know, just those whole foods that are going to be really helpful for us. And prioritizing those things, can we get you to a position where, okay, now our metabolism is back up to a level where we can actually comfortably
cut the calories, right, back to probably where you started,
right,
but now you're used to more,
right?
So this actually is going to work this time, right?
Yeah. So definitely something that I think is really valuable for people to hear is all the different, you know, it's not cut and dry when it comes to you know, weight loss, when it comes to fat loss. Like you have to consider what you've done in the past. You have to consider where your body composition is at. I feel like our conversation about protein has digressed into body composition, which is great. It's really, you know, because that's what we're talking about when we're talking about protein is body composition, and what that does for you. I do want to, you know, we're getting towards the end of where I want to be in terms of time. You know, the people that I work with are, again, primarily older, heading into retirement, or already there. One of the things that I saw recently that I thought was really great, I think this might have been Andrew Coates, it might have been somebody else, but posted something about, hey, you know, muscle mass should be part of your retirement strategy. And I've had some people push back on me, saying like, hey, I want you, you know, if it's like 150 grams of protein a day, this is what I want you to get in a day. They're like, I don't know if my body can handle that. Like, you know, talk to me about, again, your thoughts on that and protein intake heading into older age.
Yeah. So, again, if you're, I'm gonna give you some numbers, right?
Sure. Yeah.
These numbers that I'm gonna give you are based off of, I think, this is what I recommend for athletes who are training, right? Yep. Or if you're on a diet, I think these are going to be the same. So I say that because anybody that's on a diet with me is also training, right? So
yeah.
From the research, we know roughly 1.2 grams, or well, let's say 1.2 to 2.2 grams per kilogram, not pounds, per kilogram of body weight is what is recommended to maximize return on investment, right? So this isn't, I'm not saying like that's a high number, but that's taking into account that you're training, breaking down muscle and need to rebuild it, right? So that requirement is higher. This isn't what I would say is maintenance, right? Like you need more to build than you do to maintain.
Right.
So that then my recommendations for Americans who use pounds is 0.6, somewhere at 0.6 is the lowest I would go, to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight. I recommend, and I almost start everybody at 0.8. I think, above that seems to be a little bit not very beneficial to go super far above that.
Yeah.
And below that, I think 0.6 is okay. I think you can get some good results there, but I think 0.8 really, like if we're talking about maximizing results, I think 0.8 is a really good sweet spot.
Yeah.
So 0.8 times your body weight. Now, caveat to that is for females, I don't really go above 185 grams of protein per day.
Yeah.
Depending of, what their body percent body fat is. But, and then for dudes, I don't go above 200. So like, if you're a 300-pound person and you take that times 0.8, that's well above 200. I don't expect you to eat more than, I don't think there's a return on investment for eating more than 200 grams of protein per day. Yeah. So that's kind of my cutoffs within those boundaries.
Yeah.
That being said, what you had mentioned, right? So as we get older, I think that number needs to go up a little bit. Now, I don't think it needs to go above so I said 0.8 to 1.2. I don't think it needs to go above 1.2 ever. I think that's still kind of your cap at the top.
Yeah.
But as you do get older, I think there's a couple things that happen. One, your requirements go up because you're breaking down a little bit more often.
Right.
Two, your absorption isn't as great. So even though you might be eating it, you might not be absorbing it.
Right? Yeah.
People don't talk about that. Like there is, like you were talking about earlier, like gut health is an important thing. And if your gut's not healthy, you're not actually going to absorb all the things that you need, right?
Yeah.
You might actually be pushing things through. So then you actually need more in general. So yeah. So older adults, I do think need to be closer to that, like 1 gram per pound.
Right.
Is what I would usually recommend for most people as they age. I think 0.8 is good, most of the time. And then I would probably push it up closer to the 1 gram per pound.
Yeah.
I think that answered your question.
Absolutely. That was fantastic. Yeah.
Cool.
And really breaking it down by those numbers. So anyone listening, like that was a masterclass in, understanding your parameters for protein. So, Adam, phenomenal. Thank you so much for coming on today. Adam, where can people find you if they're looking for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So on Facebook, it's Richmond Training Systems. That is my LLC. And then on Instagram, I am at Adam D. Richmond.
Cool. All right, man. Well, for those listening, hope you guys got a lot out of this. Really try to week in and week out give you guys, plenty of good tips, actionable strategies. I haven't said this in a while on the podcast, but if you've been listening for a while and maybe you've just been listening and absorbing, like now's the time to implement. Like that was a really good, a lot of really good stuff in there and really easy applicable strategies. I would take what we just broke down for you and apply it, and see, give it 4 to 6 weeks, give it, 6 to 12 weeks and just be consistent. Increase that protein intake, add some resistance training, message me or even message Adam if you're looking for, something to, something specific to implement. And, we love helping you guys. So, that's what we want. We want you to take this information and use it, live healthier lives. Like, my goal is my community lives on average 5 years longer, right? That's the goal. We want people to be living longer and enjoying it, right? Not just being confined to,
health span, not just lifespan, right?
Exactly. I love that. Cool. Adam, thank you so much. Everybody else, we'll see you guys next time.
Absolutely. My pleasure.